It was Lucas's birthday party, and I woke up at 5:30. Not because of an alarm, those got replaced years ago when my kids were little, and sleep became a luxury. The sky was still dark when I stirred, a faint blush of tangerine pink blooming across the kitchen window, like someone had spilled milk into the sunset. I sat up gently. The house was silent except for the steady ticking of the wall clock and the sudden sputter of the neighbor's sprinkler system kicking on. My knees were stiff in old complaint. I waited a few seconds on the edge of the bed before standing, my fingers brushing the wrinkled to-do list I'd scribbled out the night before. Technically, this party was supposed to be organized by Brian and Natalie. In reality, they just came up with the idea. Everything else naturally fell to me. It's just easier to do it at your place, Natalie had said over the phone. The backyard's bigger, and the lighting's great. She paused, then added, and the kids love your blueberry muffins. It sounded like a compliment, but I knew what it meant. I was handling everything. She texted me a flood of screenshots: cream cheese puffs, mini sliders, Sophie's favorite chocolate muffins. Even the drinks were specified, not from concentrate, fresh pressed only. I put my phone down quietly and took a deep breath. Of course I was tired, but I still replied, "Sure, no problem." I tied on my apron, flipped on the kitchen lights. As the fridge lit up, I felt like a stagehand behind the curtain, setting the scene for yet another family production. The stovetop was simmering with corn chowder. In the oven, the vanilla sponge I'd made the night before was rising gently. I whipped cream in steady circles. The mixers were echoing in the quiet kitchen like a sacred ritual. By 9:30, Brian and his family arrived. "Hey Mom, we're here," Brian called as the door swung open, sounding just like he did when he was 10, but he wasn't that boy in sneakers anymore. Natalie followed behind him in beige heels, her coat draped over one arm, holding a clear container in the other. "You didn't lay out the tablecloth yet?" she asked, eyeing the dining table with a wrinkle in her brow. "Didn't you have that champagne-colored one last time? This blue one clashes with the balloons." I looked up and smiled. "The gold one got ruined in the wash last year. This is a new one." Her eyes drifted to the drink bucket. "Is orange juice the only option? We usually do lemon soda. Lucas doesn't like things too sweet." I swallowed the words. "You didn't mention that," and instead said, "I'll check the fridge. Maybe we have some." "Oh no, don't trouble yourself," she said with a wave of her hand, like brushing off a crumb. "I'm just saying." Lucas had spotted his gift the second he walked in a soft gray-blue sweater I had knitted from the finest wool I could find, with a little lion embroidered on the chest. It was sitting neatly wrapped on the sideboard. "You still knit?" Natalie glanced at the box and gave a light laugh. "You really have too much time on your hands. But don't bother, won't wear stuff like that." My hand paused mid-wipe on the kitchen knife. She didn't wait for a reply. She strolled outside to inspect whether the balloons were hung symmetrically. I bent back over the counter, hands moving, but something inside me had gone still. At 10:30, Angela and her family finally showed up. The car door slammed, and Max immediately screamed, "I want to get out. I'm going in first." Seconds later, the clomp of his shoes echoed down the hallway, straight across my freshly mopped hardwood floors. He had a half-eaten glazed donut in one hand, leaving a trail of sticky icing as he ran. "Max," Angela yelled, already on the phone, "don't make a mess." But she didn't even glance up, just kept walking, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I'll be in San Francisco Wednesday morning." No, let John cover for now. Listen to me." I took Max's coat, led him to the bathroom, and gently shut the door behind us. Angela's voice trailed off as she walked into the living room. "She's used to doing all this. Just let her handle it," she said, her tone as casual as talking about the weather. She was speaking to Dennis. He had just reached the kitchen doorway, a serving tray in his hands. When she said she's used to it, I saw him pause mid-step. He gave a small nod and backed away, looking vaguely apologetic. The party picked up quickly. Kids were tearing through the backyard. Max tripped in the grass, his pants smeared in mud. Natalie glanced over and said, "It's Finny as long as he's happy." Lucas was spinning under the balloons. Sophie had gathered 2 little girls in the corner to do collage crafts. I was darting between the kitchen and the table laying out salad, fruit tarts, chicken wings, checking the cooler to make sure there was enough soda and sparkling grape juice. When the family gathered for photos, I was still in the kitchen, drying my hands. Sophie came running to tug at my apron. "Grandma, we're taking a picture. Come on." "Let her finish what she's doing," Angela said. brushing her daughter's arm and steering her away. She'll be done in a minute. I stood at the kitchen doorway and watched them line up by the wicker chairs. Brian had his arm around Natalie. Dennis rested his hand on Angela's shoulder. The kids in front were grinning like a toothpaste commercial. The camera clicked. I was still holding the tray Lucas's favorite, chicken nuggets, still steaming. The scent rose up warm and savory, and suddenly, my eyes stung. In that moment, I realized I wasn't part of the picture. I was the backdrop. Quiet, useful, invisible. By the time I set the tray down and looked up again, the group had dispersed. Angela was scrolling through her phone. Natalie was reviewing party photos to check if she looked okay in them. The kids had vanished. I turned back to the kitchen. The counter was littered with cake crumbs. In the sink, 2 bowls, for glasses, a tipped-over juice cup, and 2 cream-smeared dish towels. And that's when the thought struck me. When did I become the stage crew in my own family's production? I couldn't even remember the last time I sat on the couch and ate a piece of cake like a guest. The party ended even faster than I'd expected. The crowd disappeared like a receding tide, leaving behind only juice stains, flecks of frosting, and me, standing alone in the quiet wreckage. I stood by the door and watched them drive away. Angela closed the trunk, waved back at me, and said, "Mom, I'm flying to Chicago next week. I'll pack tonight. Could you come by in a couple days to help with Sophie and Max's school schedules?" I nodded. To be honest, I didn't fully catch what she said. I just nodded out of habit more than anything else. Before Natalie got into the car, she shoved a few bags of uneaten snacks into my arms. "You keep these. No sense wasting them." She didn't mention the sweater. Lucas took every toy and gift he received, but left behind the one package wrapped with care, the one I had made for him. It sat quietly in the corner of my kitchen, like a puzzle piece that didn't belong to the picture anymore. "Grandma's clothes are always so outdated," Lucas said bluntly, the mockery in his voice sharp and clean. Before I could react, Natalie gave a little laugh. "Don't say it like that, Marilyn. Maybe next time don't bother making things like that. He doesn't wear sweaters. He likes hoodies with graphics." She was stuffing gift bags into the car as she said it, her face void of hesitation or warmth. I looked at the sweater, still sitting exactly where I'd left it, and something inside my chest pinched like a needle. The door shut. The engine turned over. The car rolled away, and silence returned like a tide. For a moment, it felt like the whole day had just been a dream I'd made up for myself. I took off my apron and turned to face the kitchen. It looked like a battlefield. Half-eaten salad lay scattered across the table, surrounded by toppled paper cups. Max's half-devoured donut had fallen onto the carpet and been trampled into a black, sticky smear. The sink overflowed with greasy trays, the chicken wing pan cold and congealed. A cake knife had been left stuck in the frosting tub, and beside it, a soaked, crumpled dish towel sagged off the counter's edge. I bent to pick up a shattered glass. The moment my finger touched the jagged edge, it sliced me clean across the tip. Blood welled up instantly. I pressed down on it with a frown and stood motionless in the center of the kitchen. The house was so quiet, quiet enough to hear my own heartbeat. The ticking of the wall clock rang in my ears like mockery. I sat down in one of the kitchen chairs, wrapping a napkin around my bleeding finger. Staring out the window, the sky had gone slate gray. A breeze rustled the leftover balloons in the yard, their plastic skin laughing in the wind. In that moment, I didn't just feel tired. I felt hollow. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep. The kind that leaks out from your bones and pools in your spine. I thought back to another time I was cleaning the kitchen. Frank had been on the couch watching the game. I'd asked if he could take the trash out. He didn't even look away from the TV. "All you do is stuff like this," he muttered. "You're not even tired. What do you need me for?" I hadn't responded. Just picked up the trash and walked outside. The wind was so strong I could barely stay upright. I remember telling myself he just didn't know how to express love. That he did, Carrie just showed it differently. But now, I know better. That was a lie I told myself to survive. The kitchen light cast its glow onto my face, and I caught my reflection in the oven door. Fine lines creased my forehead. My hair was unbrushed, still loose from this morning. My skin looked pale. Dark shadows sat like bruises beneath my eyes. And I asked myself, what am I to them, really? A mother? A grandmother? Or just an endless supply of free labor? I remembered the younger version of me. Back when I taught piano at the music school downtown, wore mid-heel pumps, and curled my hair. Back when Frank used to say, "When you play, it's like the piano comes alive." But after we got married, he changed. He told me, "The world's too complicated. You're safest at home." After the kids were born, I tried going back to teaching. Within 3 months, the comments started. "We don't need your income. What I need is someone to take care of the house." I gave in. Told myself it was love. It was family. It was duty. And today, the handmade sweater I poured my care into was dismissed as useless. The party I had spent hours planning was picked apart like a product review. They took the family photo without waiting for me. And when my finger bled from cleaning up their mess, not one of them noticed. And if they had, I doubt they'd have said, "Are you okay? Let me help." That night, I cleaned every last corner. I scraped the cake crumbs into the bin. I wiped the juice stains from the table. I picked up the shattered glass piece by piece. I took Lucas's sweater, folded it gently, and tucked it into the bottom drawer. Then I turned off the lights and sat in the living room, the room dim and silent. The streetlight outside spilled in through the window, casting a pale glow on my hand, still wrapped in the blood-specked paper towel. And in that stillness, one question echoed in my mind. How much longer am I going to live like this? It wasn't even 8 the next morning when I heard the familiar thud of a car door. The curtains were still drawn, but I already knew who it was. Angela's SUV rolled into the driveway, and before the wheels had even come to a full stop, Max flung the door open and leapt out, shouting, "I'm bringing the green skateboard inside." I opened the front door. Angela was juggling a suitcase in one hand and a phone wedged between her shoulder and ear, her face etched with urgency and exhaustion. "I'm literally at my mom's front door now. Yes. I need that brief finalized before tomorrow's pitch. Beth didn't get back to me yesterday." She nodded at me to take the backpack off her shoulder. I did, just in time to catch Max as he charged inside and began digging into the sofa cushions. "Slow down, buddy," I said, pulling him gently away. "And stop hiding the TV remote again." "Okay." Angela ended the call and flashed me a smile. Not a real one, just the kind people give when they're used to being in a hurry. "You're amazing, Mom. Seriously, I have a flight to catch. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. They're all yours for today." "I thought you said your trip wasn't until next week," I asked, keeping my voice even. She hesitated for a beat, clearly unsure what she'd told me. She gave a tight laugh. "Flight got rescheduled. You know how chaotic booking is these days." I didn't argue. I just nodded. Max had already gotten into my kitchen drawers, hunting for candy. Within 2 minutes, my freshly cleaned floor was decorated with muddy footprints. He picked up one of my spice jars and started twisting the lid. "Grandma, can I use this as a rocket launcher?" he asked, beaming. "No," I said softly. "Put it down." He didn't listen. Kept twisting until the entire jar exploded across the tile. Salt everywhere. He burst into laughter like it was the best invention of the century. Angela peeked her head in, gave a casual glance, and said, "If he's too much, just put him in front of the TV. He doesn't need to learn anything today anyway." I bent down to grab the broom. Lips parted, but no words came out. Angela zipped up her suitcase and made her way to the door. "Oh, by the way, I put their lunch boxes in the fridge. Don't let Sophie have too much sugar. Her tooth's been bothering her again." "What time will you land?" I asked. 3:30. Dennis will pick me up. "And the kids?" She waved a hand like she was brushing off a hair. "You've got them, just like always." The door slammed, and then it was just me and the kids again. Max zoomed across the living room doing launch tests with his skateboard. Sophie, in contrast, sat quietly by the window, coloring. She looked up and asked, her voice gentle and without judgment, "Grandma, why are you always so busy?" I froze. Her question was pure, curious, not accusing or pitying. "I mean, do you like doing all this stuff?" she added. I smiled faintly, crouching to straighten her drawing papers. "I used to think I did. And now, I don't really know." She frowned, trying to make sense of my answer. But soon, she went back to drawing her pink bunny. Around 10:30, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sharon standing there with a bag of apple pies, wearing her faded dove print t-shirt and that signature broad grin of hers. "Passed by the farmer's market. Thought of you," she said, walking right in. "That party yesterday looked wild, saw the photos on Instagram." I gave her a wry smile. "Wild, yes. But I was the one left cleaning up the jungle. Let me guess. You were the only one cleaning. I didn't answer, just nodded. She scanned the kitchen and the living room, eyes resting on Max, who was now crawling under the coffee table. She let out a low whistle. You look like someone's unpaid Livian gatekeeper. I let out a soft laugh, not because it was funny, but because it hit too close, too accurate. It hurt. You're not their maid, Marilyn, she said gently. You're not a 247 nanny either. You're a person, with a name, interests, a soul. You're not some background automation system this family runs on. They're not bad people, I said, voice low. They're just used to me always being here. That's exactly the problem. She leaned against the doorframe. When you become part of the wallpaper, people stop seeing you. I stood silent. Outside, yesterday's party streamers fluttered in the breeze, and suddenly my chest felt tight. What would they do if one day you weren't here? She asked. I shook my head. My throat closed. I've never thought about that. Well, she said, smiling as she reached into her tote bag. Let's start now. She handed me a flyer. A soft pink background with bold white text. Being seen starts with showing up. Friday morning, Sharon said. Women's support group. I go every week. Come with me. I stared at the paper. My finger, the one I'd sliced yesterday, was still throbbing slightly. And in that moment, I realized the cut never really stopped bleeding. I'd just gotten used to the pain. I looked up and nodded slowly. Okay, I'll come. Sharon grinned. I'll pick you up. We agreed on the time. That afternoon, I brewed a pot of tea. The kids had dozed off on the couch. The house was finally quiet. I sat in the living room, eyes fixed on the old wall clock as it ticked in circles. My life had been like that clock, always ticking, always moving, but never really going anywhere. That morning, I was ready 20 minutes early. I wore a soft gray-blue sweater and gave my hair a gentle curl. In the mirror, I didn't look like someone heading to a party. I looked more like someone bracing for an uncertain job interview. Sharon pulled up right on time. She wore sunglasses and waved enthusiastically from behind the wheel. Hop in. Today we're learning how not to say, I'm sorry, every 5 minutes. I smiled, closed the door behind me. The radio was playing an old song, Carole King's It's Too Late. The melody drifted through the car, slow and wistful. The lyrics felt like they'd been lifted right out of my chest. The meeting was held in the community room of the city library, a modest space, but warm and inviting. About a dozen chairs were arranged in a loose circle. Posters lined the walls. You're not alone. Stop shrinking to fit spaces you've outgrown. I hesitated at the door, unsure where to look. Everyone seemed to know each other, smiling, chatting like old friends. I stood by the entrance, feeling like an audience member who'd wandered into the wrong play. Sharon patted my shoulder. Sit here. I'll get you some tea. I settled into a corner seat. Next to me was a woman with a full head of silver hair and a bright red jacket. She leaned over with a warm smile and extended her hand. I'm Irene, retired nurse. First time here. I nodded, managing a small smile. Hi, I'm Marilyn. First time's always the hardest, she said, chuckling. I was a wreck my first session last year. Couldn't say a word, ended up crying so much I ran out of tissues. I laughed gently, the tension in my shoulders beginning to soften. The facilitator's name was Tamara. Her hair was dyed a dusky lilac gray, and her voice had that kind of clear steadiness that lands with intention, like the stroke of a pencil on clean paper. She began, today's theme, who I am is not defined by what I do for others. She invited us to share a recent moment when we felt unseen. When it was my turn, I hesitated. I don't really have anything special to share. Sharon looked over at me, her eyes calm and encouraging. It's okay. Just speak, we're here to listen. I opened my mouth, planning to say something polite, but the words that came out felt more like a flood breaching a dam. Last week, I spent 5 days preparing for my grandson's birthday party. I baked a cake, decorated the backyard, bought balloons, made 4 different kinds of salad. I paused. My voice dipped lower. And when it was time for the family photo, they didn't ask me to join. They said I was still busy. The room was silent for a moment. No one laughed. No one jumped in to fix it. Just that soft, safe quiet waiting for me to finish. I wasn't looking for a thank you. I said, I just realized they've taken me for granted for so long that even I started thinking it was normal. Irene reached over with a tissue. That's when I noticed me eyes had started to well up. Tamara nodded slowly. Being useful is not the same as being loved. That line struck something deep and dull in my chest. Useful. I heard Frank's voice again. That broken record tone I knew too well. You take care of the kids. Run the house, that's what you're supposed to do. You're a woman. It's what women are for. Back then, I didn't question it. Even years later, I would still whisper to myself, you are useful, and that's why you matter. But today, for the first time, I saw it clearly. Being useful doesn't mean being loved. On the drive home, the radio played Norah Jones's Don't Know Why. The streets passed by slowly outside the window, sunlight sliding across the windshield like a thin film of memory. Sharon didn't say much. Every so often, she glanced at me. I knew she understood exactly what was happening inside my head. It wasn't sadness, it was a kind of overdue clarity. When we got back, I didn't head to the kitchen. I went straight to the living room and opened the old box of sheet music I hadn't touched in years. My fingers brushed over the faded pages, breathing in the scent of old paper and dust. I pulled out a familiar piece, walked to the electric piano by the window, and sat down. Once, I had been a teacher, a piano teacher, not a sticky note manager, not a luggage handler, not a human mood stabilizer. I used to stand in front of classrooms and let my fingers tell stories through melody. I pressed the first key. The sound was weak, a little wobbly, but real. A neighbor walking her dog paused outside. She stopped, listened for a moment, then smiled and moved on. I sat there and played the entire song. My hands trembled. The keys stuck a little from dust. But I didn't stop. I wasn't playing for anyone else. In that moment, I just wanted to say one thing to myself. I'm still here. That afternoon, the sun was gentle and golden. I had just finished playing a piece by Schubert and was about to close the piano lid when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Angela standing there, her face drawn with that rushed, preoccupied look that left no room for pleasantries. She held a duffel bag in one hand, and behind her stood Sophie, backpack slung over her shoulder, looking sullen and withdrawn. Mom, I need a favor, Angela said bluntly. Sophie's going to camp next week. I have a business trip. Dennis can take care of Max, but I'm swamped and can't manage both. I looked at her, my tone calm. I have rehearsals that week. She blinked, confused. You have what? Rehearsals, I repeated, sitting back down on the couch. The piano class recital. It's next month at the library. Angela stared at me, as if I were speaking a foreign language. Wait, since when do you have a piano class, and can't you reschedule it? This is important. Sophie needs you. I need me too, I said, meeting her eyes. My voice wasn't loud, but it was steady and unmistakably clear. Her expression shifted. Are you seriously saying no to helping? You never say no. I nodded gently. Yes. I never used to realize I could. Angela set the bag down hard. Her frustration flared. Do you know how busy I am? If this deal goes through, I could be promoted by the end of the year. Can't you put off the piano stuff for once? I didn't answer right away. I simply looked at her, really looked at her. And in her, I saw a reflection of my younger self. Always rushing, always putting everyone else first, always leaving herself for last. Sophie tugged lightly on her mother's sleeve. Mom, can we just go home? She asked quietly. Angela glanced down at her daughter. The anger in her face began to dissolve, leaving something more complicated behind. She inhaled deeply, picked up the bag. Fine, I'll ask someone else. As she turned to leave, I said, Angela. She didn't look back. I'm not refusing to help you. I'm refusing to keep being the person who drops everything, every time, like my life doesn't count. She stood still at the door, silent for several seconds. Then, softly, she said, I didn't think you'd turn into this. I didn't think I could, I replied. The door shut behind her. My heart was pounding. My palms were damp with sweat. I stayed seated on the couch for a long time, until my phone rang. It was Brian. Mom, did you forget to pay for Lucas's summer camp last week? He asked right away. Natalie's card got declined. And when she checked, she saw the charge was still unpaid. I closed my eyes, took a slow breath, then said, I didn't forget. I decided not to cover your children's expenses anymore. There was a pause on the other end. What do you mean? Since when? His tone tightened. Defensive. You always said. What I said before doesn't apply anymore. I cut in. From now on, you and Natalie are the parents. You handle your own family budget. My retirement money is for me. It's not an emergency fund. Did Angela put this idea in your head? He said, his voice rising. Is this because of her? No one influenced me. I stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the rose bushes blooming in the yard. I've just decided to start investing my time and energy where it actually matters. You've changed, he muttered. Yes, I said. I've changed. And honestly, it took me far too long. I hung up. Outside, the roses were in full bloom, deep red, with that restless energy summer always brings. Sunlight poured over the petals, their edges flickering like strings of light, like piano wire. For most of my life, I thought being needed meant I was loved. Now I understand. That was just the way I avoided expressing my own needs. I traded silence and sacrifice for a place in other people's lives. But today, I made space in my life for me. I returned to the piano, reopened the sheet music. The moment my fingertips touched the keys, I felt it. My life had turned a page. They don't understand me because they never tried to see me. And for the first time, I've made a plan that belongs entirely to me. A month ago, if someone had told me I'd be sitting in a sunroom, singing You've Got a Friend in harmony with a dozen other women, I probably would have laughed and said, that sounds like someone else's life. But here I was seated in a slightly worn yet sturdy folding chair, a cup of coffee in my hand, sunlight filtering through the blinds and painting soft lines across the hardwood floor. Around me sat a circle of silver-haired women, faces radiant, voices warm. We were Coastal Voices, a local arts group for women in their 60s and 70s. The members ranged from 62 to 78. Some were retired nurses, others former lawyers. One even a professional dancer in her younger days. Our backgrounds were different, but we'd all experienced the same thing. At some point in our lives, we'd become invisible. To our families, to society, sometimes even to ourselves. That day was my first rehearsal. I was nervous, clutching my sheet music and a bottle of water, sitting off to the side. The group was led by Lana, a former musical theater actress with a high ponytail and a voice that sparkled like wind chimes. Marilyn, she called. Come over here, Rue saved you a good seat. They welcomed me into the circle with warmth that felt unearned but instantly soothing. We began with vocal warm-ups. I struggled to find the rhythm at first, and my voice was barely a whisper. Lana came over and gently tapped my shoulder. Don't worry, she smiled. This is our world, no judges, no audience. I smiled back, and slowly, my voice found its place, like a drop of water slipping into its river. After rehearsal, we all sat together, chatting. One woman talked about leaving a toxic marriage in her 70s. Another shared how she began traveling alone after her husband passed. Someone else beamed as she described filing her taxes for the first time without help and how proud she felt. I listened, and as each story unfolded, it felt like something inside me was gently peeling open, an old scab lifting. It hurt a little, but it also felt light. Sharon caught my eye and winked. Told you. This is where you belong. I nodded, my throat tightening. This wasn't usefulness. This was welcome. Not because I filled a role, but because I showed up as myself. After lunch, someone suggested we take turns playing our favorite piece on the piano. I hesitated. Then I stood and walked toward the upright piano. I played Edelweiss. It's a simple tune, gentle and familiar. I used to play it for Angela when she was little. She always said, it sounds like flowers blooming. When I finished, the room broke into applause. But not the polite kind. Not the thanks, Mom, you get after cooking dinner. Not the rare, that's nice Frank used to mutter. This applause felt real. For me. For Marilyn. I stood and said softly, it's been over 20 years since I played a full song in front of anyone. The woman to my left canary-ached over and gently took my hand. Well, you played like you never stopped. That afternoon, I returned home. My phone screen lit up. Angela had called. I didn't call back. Not because I was angry, but because, for the first time, I understood. I don't need to answer immediately. My time can be mine. I brewed a cup of lemon black tea. Opened the living room curtains. Sunlight poured in. That sweater, the one I'd knit for Lucas, still lay quietly at the bottom of the drawer. I didn't reach for it. Sophie's voice floated through my memory. Grandma, why are you always so busy? Back then, I hadn't given her a real answer. But now, I knew. Because I'd never learned how to stop and ask myself what I wanted. I'd never given myself permission to want. I sat back at the piano and reopened my music book. At that same moment, Angela sat at her kitchen counter, staring at her phone after I'd let the voicemail go. Her face was tight, tired, One hand braced her forehead. Dennis came in, holding a small piece of paper. It was one of Sophie's drawings. In crayon, it read, "I miss Grandma." Angela sighed. "She's just not helping us anymore." Dennis leaned against the fridge. His tone calm but direct. "She's finally started helping herself." Angela looked at him sharply. "That's easy for you to say. I'm not saying it to sound detached." He looked down at the drawing. "You know, my mom raised me on her own. She worked at a bank. Every night, I'd wake up and the kitchen light would still be on. She'd just finished a stack of reports, then she'd pack my lunch and iron my school uniform. Her eyes were bloodshot most nights, but she never said a word." Angela said nothing. "I couldn't do anything for her then," Dennis added softly. "But I remember how. When she cooked dinner, she'd sometimes just stare at the plates like she didn't know who she was anymore." "Marilyn's not your mom," Angela muttered. "She lasted longer than mine did." He paused. "And people like her, the ones who hold it together too long, when they finally let go, you better not stand in their way. A woman can carry the world on her shoulders, but she can get so tired she forgets she's still in it." Angela didn't respond. Outside, the garbage truck rumbled down the street. She glanced toward the window, and suddenly remembered, even something as small as taking out the trash. Not her, not Brian, not their dad ever offered to do it. It had always been her mom, Marilyn. The invitation arrived on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday morning. I was just about to leave for rehearsal when I found the letter tucked inside the mailbox, a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the seal of the community library. The paper felt weighty, almost like an old-fashioned concert invitation. My fingertips trembled slightly as I held it. As I opened it, I heard Frank's voice echo in my mind. "You're just a housewife. Stop wasting time on those silly dreams." But the words on the page drowned out his voice entirely. "Dear Marilyn, we are honored to invite you to perform as a featured piano soloist at the upcoming Voices of the City Women's Arts Gala, to be held at the Municipal Hall on the 25th of this month. We believe sound is more than music is existence." I read it 3 times, just to make sure it was real. That afternoon, I brought the letter to rehearsal. The room nearly exploded with excitement. Someone even knocked over a pile of sheet music. Lana hugged me and spun me around. "I knew it. I told you you have the kind of playing that makes people believe." Sharon leaned in with a grin. "You better wear something red. Red means re-entry." I shook my head, laughing. "I'm not making a grand return. I'm just playing a song." She tilted her head, dead serious. "No, Marilyn, you're meant to be on that stage." A few days later, she came with me to the local dress shop. We wandered past rows of scarves until she pulled out a red wool one from the back of a rack and draped it over my shoulders. "This is it," she said, patting my hand. "You wear this on stage, and no one will dare mistake you for the background." I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman standing there held herself tall. A bold splash of red wrapped around her neck. And in that moment, a single word floated to the front of my mind. Present. I was here. I was seen. On the day of the performance. The sun came out in full glory. A line had already begun forming in front of Municipal Hall. I entered through the side door with my performer's pass, changed into my outfit, and waited backstage. The MC was warming up the crowd. My hands were cold. My heart beat like it used to when I was young and stepping on stage for the very first time. I glanced at my phone. A message from Angela. "Last-minute issue with the project. Stuck at the office. Won't make it tonight. Good luck." I stared at the message. No anger. No disappointment. Just nothing. Whether she came or not didn't define me anymore. A few minutes before my set, the backstage door creaked open. It was Dennis, holding Sophie's hand. "I hope we're not crashing the party," he said quietly. Sophie ran to me the moment she saw me. "Grandma, I wore the yellow dress you like." I knelt to hug her, and in that second, it felt like the sun had reached into my chest. Dennis walked over. "Eyes sincere. I told her you were performing magic tonight." I laughed softly. "I'm just an old lady playing the piano." He shook his head. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met." I nearly lost it right then. All those years of swallowing hurt, hiding sacrifice, pushing down everything I was. In that moment, I wasn't invisible anymore. A grown man had seen Menet just as a mother, not just as someone useful but with respect. I walked out onto the stage. The house lights glowed softly. From the 3rd row, I saw Sophie sitting up straight, her tiny hands wrapped around her doll. Eyes locked on me. I sat at the piano. My fingers touched the keys, and it felt like the music itself was lifting me. I played Moon River, a slow, nostalgic tune. I'd practiced it for 2 weeks before I dared to choose it. As the notes flowed soft, measured, steady, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Ease. I wasn't playing for approval. I wasn't hoping to please. Every note I played whispered the same thing to myself. You deserve to be heard. When the piece ended, the applause erupted. Not polite, not obligatory, real, lingering applause. Applause that meant something. Sophie stood up. Cheeks flushed. Grandma, that was amazing. Dennis rose too, eyes glinting in the lights. He didn't say much, just nodded. But that nod carried weight. It was acknowledgement. It was the kind of recognition only adults give when they finally understand someone's whole story. And I cried. Not out of sadness. Out of lightness. For the first time, I felt seen. That night, back home, I wiped off my makeup, unwound the red scarf. The kitchen lights were off. There were no backpacks on the couch, no cake crumbs or toys on the floor. Just me. And the quiet. But this time, I didn't feel alone. I knew I was still glowing. And finally someone saw the light. The morning after the performance, I woke to a voice message from Sophie. Her tiny voice chirped through the speaker with excitement. Grandma, when you played the piano that night, I thought you were like the fairy tale who turns moonlight into music. I listened, smiling as something frozen deep inside me quietly began to thaw. But at Angela's house, a storm was beginning to brew. She had just stepped through the door when Sophie ran up, beaming, waving a photograph. Mom, look, it's Grandma playing the piano. She was on such a big stage. Angela blinked, caught off guard. She took the photo from her daughter's hands. On the back, in Sophie's careful handwriting, it read, "My grandma is a star." Angela's expression darkened. You took her, she snapped, turning toward Dennis, who had just walked out of the kitchen. Dennis nodded calmly. Yes, I did. You didn't even talk to me about it. Angela's voice sharpened. She's my mother, not yours. Dennis set the kettle down and leaned against the counter. And you're her daughter, but you've never really seen her. Angela scoffed. Don't make me out to be some villain. She raised me. I know exactly what kind of person she is. She's always been like this, hosting, worrying about everyone, picking up after people. She's the kind who doesn't know how to sit still. Angela, Dennis said quietly, she's not a role. She's a person. A whole one. Have you ever once asked if she wants to be doing all that now? Angela bristled. You don't understand. You didn't grow up with her. She's the type to take on everything, then act like it doesn't bother her. She doesn't act like it doesn't bother her. She was never allowed to say it did. Dennis's voice dropped. I grew up with a single mother. I know what it looks like when a woman keeps a home running while everyone else forgets she exists. I can still see the look in my mother's eyes, like she couldn't even remember who she was anymore. And Marilyn, I've seen that same look in her. Angela paused. Her expression faltered. Her voice dipping lower. So what? She never said she didn't want to. She's saying it now, Dennis replied, steady and sure. The problem is, you got so used to her silence meaning everything's fine, that now her speaking up feels like betrayal. Angela stared at him. Her gaze wavered, defensive but uncertain. I have work, she muttered. I have pressure. I'm doing everything I can to keep this family together. I can't do everything. Dennis didn't push. He simply said, gently, you don't have to do everything. But you do need to understand caretaking was never supposed to be a life sentence for your mother. Angela opened her mouth but didn't speak. She stood there, lips parted, the words not quite forming. Meanwhile, I was sitting at my dining room table, turning over an old photograph I hadn't seen in years. It was from when Angela was 6. I had taken her to a classical music concert, her first. She was sitting on my lap in the picture, eyes locked on the stage, her face full of wonder. Back then, she used to say, Mommy, when I grow up, I want to play piano too. But she grew up and became the kind of woman who tells her daughter, don't bother Mommy, I'm working. And I don't blame her. Not entirely. She was taught to believe. This is what moms are supposed to do. Be accommodating. Be reliable. Be invisible. That evening, I brewed a pot of tea and sat out on the porch, watching the old ginkgo tree in the yard. The wind rustled its leaves, and for a moment, it felt like someone whispering softly in my ear. I no longer spent time wondering when they'd finally understand me. I simply knew. I wasn't going back to the kitchen. Not as the background. Not as the default. not as the quiet parentheses around someone else's life. Starting now, my existence is no longer a footnote. The call came just after I'd wrapped up a midday practice session and was heading to the market for fruit and milk. It was Brian. Hey, Mom. For Thanksgiving, we're thinking of having a few friends over. And Natalie figured it'd be easier to do it at your place. You've got more outdoor space. And you're better in the kitchen. We'll just bring dessert, that way the kids won't wreck our place. I stood by my car door, paused for a beat. I already have plans this Thanksgiving, I said. I'm helping host a piano salon that day. Brian went quiet for a second, like he hadn't heard me right. You have plans? Yep. I'm coordinating a silver arts program through the community. I'll be helping with the setup and performances, I said as I slid into the driver's seat. So I won't be able to host this year. His voice sharpened. But we already confirmed the guest list. Natalie told her friends we'd be doing it at your house. And now you're just backing out. He said your house like it was a shared stage, but only when they needed me to run the production. It hit me as strangely ironic. You can tell them, I said with a soft smile, that this year, your mom's playing piano, not mashing potatoes. There was a pause, then a flicker of frustration in his voice. Has Angela been getting into your head? She's been acting weird lately too. What is it with you two and this whole independence kick? It's because I never really understood what boundaries meant. I said, you're a father, a husband. You and Natalie need to handle your own plans and budget. It shouldn't fall on a 6-to-6-year-old woman to manage your holiday logistics. He let out a short breath, then muttered, half mocking, so what? No, you're living your own little life. You could call it that, I replied with a chuckle. And tell Natalie to stop forwarding me your mortgage spreadsheets. That's between you two, not me. I dropped my phone into my purse and rested my hands on the steering wheel, not in any rush to turn the ignition. It was the first time I'd ever turned down one of their holiday appointments. No guilt, no hesitation, just a surprising sense of relief. That afternoon, I headed to the Education Center's activity room. Our Silver Keys piano class had reached its 6th week. We'd grown from 4 students to 9, including 2 new women who drove 40 minutes from the next town to join. Grace wore a sparkly gold sweater, what she called her performance color. She was still practicing C major arpeggios, her fingers stiff, but her laugh rang louder than her notes. I asked each student to play a melody they knew best. Some played children's tunes from decades ago. One managed a few bars of a Christmas hymn. When it was my turn, I played Claire de Lune. The room fell silent, notes flowing gently through the air like warm light through gauze. Grace stared at me and whispered, "You should have been on stage 20 years ago." I smiled. Back then, I thought the kitchen was my stage. She blinked, then reached over and squeezed my hand. After class, I wrote my favorite quote on the board. "You're not too late. You're right on time." That night, I got a text from Natalie. "Since you're not helping with Thanksgiving this year, we'll just go out to eat. Lucas still wanted your pumpkin pie. Though, too bad." I didn't reply. Not out of anger, just a quiet understanding that disappointment cloaked in guilt wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I stood at the threshold of the kitchen, glancing at the old recipe binder by the oven. I realized it had been 3 weeks since I'd touched it. I no longer needed to bake to prove I was lovable. That weekend, I attended a Women Reclaiming Power forum at the library. One line from a speaker struck me so deeply. I wrote it in my notebook and circled it in red. "We're not someone's something, we are whole on our own." I wasn't just Brian's mom, Natalie's mother-in-law, or Lucas's grandma. I was Marilyn Thompson, piano teacher, community volunteer, free woman, and that identity, it didn't need anyone's approval. The weather had turned cold. The leaves on the sycamore tree drifted down one by one into the yard. I took down the summer wind chimes and replaced them with soft fabric ornaments for fall. When the breeze blew, they no longer chimed brightly, but made a quiet rustling sound like a gentle reminder. The season had changed. And maybe it was time for the way a mother and daughter relate to each other to change too. Angela no longer called as often to ask for help with the kids or the house. But I could feel her inching closer. That day, I had just finished teaching a Silver Keys piano session and was packing up my sheet music when I heard a voice I knew by heart. "Mom." I turned and saw her standing in the doorway, still in her trench coat, Sophie holding her hand, one foot already across the threshold. "Can we sit in for a bit?" I nodded, no questions asked. Sophie ran up, grinning. "Grandma, what are you playing today?" I lifted her into a chair with a smile. Today we're playing over the rainbow. Angela stood by the door, watching me interact with the other women. Her expression was hard to read. She had never looked at me quite like that before, not as someone who simply filled gaps in her schedule, or cooked meals, or handled school pickups, but as a woman, surrounded by other women, being respected, listened to, seen. She quietly greeted Grace, who smiled and whispered back, "Your mom's eyes light up when she plays." That single sentence landed inside Angela like a pebble in still water. She sat in the corner, gripping her purse strap, saying nothing. It wasn't until the last note faded and the room burst into applause that she finally exhaled, like surfacing from underwater. She stayed behind after class. I was folding up music sheets when she stepped forward. "When I was little, didn't you used to play that song every Christmas?" I paused. "Yes. You were in a school production of The Wizard of Oz. I practiced it every night so you could fall asleep to it." She nodded slowly, eyes misting over. "I think I forgot all about that," she said quietly. "But when Sophie heard you play today, she grabbed my hand and asked, 'Mommy, did Grandma used to play this for you too?'" Angela gave a small laugh, but there was guilt in her eyes. I didn't know what to say. I had to sit there and search for the memory. I stopped packing, watching her carefully. Her voice cracked. "I always thought of you as part of the house. The meals, the doors opening, the rides, the bandages. You were fixtures." She stepped closer, her voice carrying something new, something real. "And somewhere along the way, I became just like Dad. I didn't say a word. I let her go on. He never really listened to you, never gave you space to dream. And I walked right into his footsteps, reducing you to a support beam." Her eyes were red now. She lowered her voice, shaking her head. "I don't want to be that person anymore. Mom, I don't." I took a deep breath and set the sheet music aside. "I'm not here to blame you," I said, stepping beside her. "I just want you to see Menet as the perfect mother, not as the housekeeper in Dad's story, but as a woman, a real one, with flaws and needs and dreams." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "You've done better than I have," she whispered. I took her hand gently. "We're both just women, Angela, learning how to be good mothers, and also learning how not to lose ourselves to motherhood." She looked up at me, something warm flickering behind her eyes. Can I learn to play piano with you?" I smiled. "Of course. But fair warning, I'm a pretty tough teacher." She laughed, then pulled me into a hug. And in that embrace, we weren't roles anymore. Not the mother, not the daughter. Just two whole women, no longer measuring ourselves by what we owed one another. That evening, Sophie handed me a drawing at the dinner table. "This is you playing piano," she said, pointing with pride. "And Mommy's sitting beside you. And I'm in the middle." I looked at the picture. My heart swelled with a kind of warmth I'd never quite known. And just like that, I understood some wounds don't just heal. They grow into something new. A bridge. And Angela and I had finally started walking across it. Together. That Sunday was bright and warm. Angela and I were about to head to a nearby cafe. And then take Sophie to try on a dress for her upcoming talent show. Before we could leave, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brian standing there, looking rumpled in a wrinkled jacket, his face tense and unsure. "Mom, can we talk?" He caught sight of Angela behind me and visibly flinched, but forced a smile anyway. I nodded and stepped aside to let him in. He scanned the room as he walked in. "Place looks a little different. New couch covers. Sharon helped me pick them," I replied plainly. He sat at the dining table, fingers drumming against the surface as he searched for the right words. "Mom, Natalie's been pretty upset lately. She says the house is a mess. The kids are wild. The washing machine's broken and she's been the one handling everything." I said nothing. I let him speak. "She just feels like this was all really sudden. I mean, you've always been the first to step up Thanksgiving, Christmas, Lucas's birthday. We've come to really depend on you, Mom. And now you're just gone. We don't know how to function." I looked at him with calm clarity. "Brian, I understand this is uncomfortable for you, but this isn't about punishment or resentment." He frowned slightly, waiting. "I'm just finally choosing not to live as someone else's fill-in-the-blank. For decades, I was the mother, the cook, the babysitter, the fixer, always after everyone else. Now I want to put me first." His mouth opened, like he wanted to argue. Angela cut in before he could. "She's not wrong. We're the ones who've been wrong." Brian blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" Angela looked straight at him. Have you ever really thought about who Mom is? Not the version you think of love's fussing, natural caretaker, but the real woman behind all that. She loved us so much she never said no, and we took that to mean she didn't have a no. His face tightened. His voice rose. So now you're on her side. You didn't even rely on her that much. Angela didn't flinch. No, I did. And that's why I know how wrong it is to keep taking. Do you remember her staying up late, sewing your Halloween costume? Or redoing the entire dinner, just because Natalie changed the menu last minute? You thought that was normal, didn't you? The room felt taut, like a string drawn too tight. I spoke gently. This isn't selfishness. It's just the first time I've ever stopped and asked what I want. Brian exhaled, voice lower. So what about us? I shook my head. You have your own family, your own responsibilities. I'm not disappearing. I'm just no longer the invisible gear that keeps your life running. He left without a word. But I knew that wasn't a rupture, it was a necessary shedding. A few days later, it was Sophie's talent show. Angela and I sat in the third row of the school auditorium. The lights dimmed, the stage lights rose. And there was Sophie wearing her little blue dress, standing tall and focused. She held a small card in her hand and read softly. My grandma plays the piano. When she plays, it sounds like her heart is dancing. She taught me that grown-ups can still have dreams, and that being strong doesn't mean being loud, it means knowing when to say no. Tears slid down my cheeks. Not from sadness, but pride. Not because she said nice things about me on stage, but because for the first time, I truly believed them. Angela reached over and took my hand. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I squeezed her hand in return. I'm proud of you too. We weren't mother and daughter tangled in cycles of asking and giving anymore. We were two whole people, sitting side by side in front of a rising generation watching, smiling, ready to cheer. Last week, I received an email from the city library. They were organizing a public storytelling series called Her Name, featuring stories of women reclaiming their lives. They asked if I would speak as a representative of women restarting from the community at next month's open forum. I read the email and froze for a moment. The old me would have been too busy planning 8 dishes and checking if the kids had socks on for a family gathering. And now, I was being asked to stand on a stage and talk about my name, my story. I replied, I'd be honored. Thank you for seeing me. Angela's been visiting a lot lately. Not to drop off kids. Not to borrow the kitchen. Just to be here. Sometimes she sits in the living room while I play piano. Sometimes she comes with Sophie, and we bake cookies together. We're learning a new way to talk to each other, starting not with tasks or to-do lists, but with rhythm, with presence. She even wrote a note and stuck it to my fridge. Do not disturb rehearsal days unless the house is on fire. I laughed for 3 days. Brian's been changing too. Not dramatically. No tearful apologies. Just a slow, clumsy kind of closeness. He stopped trying to pull me back into the family matriarch role. Instead, he mailed me a drawing Lucas made. A house. A piano. Grandma's house, he wrote, where she's happy playing music. No apology. But it came with an unexpected gentleness. Natalie didn't send another list of instructions. She sent this instead. Thank you for everything you did for us. I hope you're truly happy now. I replied with a smiley face. That was enough. Not every relationship needs to be perfectly repaired. Sometimes, loosening the grip, stopping the pull is already healing. That afternoon, I went to the library's front hall for a rehearsal of my talk. I stood behind the podium, looked out at the rows of empty seats, and practiced my opening line. Good evening. My name is Marilyn Thompson. I'm 66 years old. Most people know me as Brian's mom, or Angela's mom, or Lucas, Sophie, and Max's grandma. But tonight, I'd like to speak to you using my own name and tell you who I am. I paused, and I looked out at those chairs. I thought of Frank, who once told me I belonged in the kitchen. I thought of Angela, who said I was like a piece of furniture, always there, always reliable. And I thought of Sophie, who once said I was a magical grandma who could turn moonlight into music. I exhaled, softly, and finally, I understood. I'm Marilyn. Not somebody, someone, just me. The room was silent, and Sophie was sitting in the front row, eyes glowing. In that moment, I realized it wasn't admiration I saw in her face. It was recognition. She could see me. I wasn't in the background anymore. I was my own light.